Canadian export, the U.S. Commerce Department is hiking anti-dumping duties on Canadian softwood lumber to 20.56%.
Provide a little bit more lumber within their supply, but there's no way that they can replace the imports coming from Canada.
I think Americans are going to be finding out very shortly the impact that these duties are going to be having on them.
Canada does not dump lumber into
The lumber industry has long been one of the most important sectors in North American trade. The U.S. and Canada have been tightly linked, with Canada providing the U.S. with a significant portion of its lumber, used in everything from housing construction to furniture manufacturing. For decades, these two countries have enjoyed a trade relationship that has seen American demand for Canadian lumber continue to grow. Canada, with its vast forests and efficient lumber production systems, has been able to meet that demand. Until now. Hit that subscribe button and join the Traveling Vibes family for more incredible journeys around the world. Don't forget to drop a comment below. I'll pin my favorite one. In an unprecedented move, Canada has recently taken a drastic step. It has effectively shut down the entire lumber supply to the United States. This was a direct response to the tariffs imposed by the U.S. under the leadership of President Trump, a move that has left the U.S. lumber industry scrambling to adapt. The sudden and sharp reduction in lumber exports has sent shockwaves through the U.S. construction sector, hitting everything from home builders to furniture makers, and leaving many wondering, how did we get here, and what happens next? This is not just another chapter in the ongoing saga of trade wars between the U.S. and its trading partners. This is a pivotal moment in U.S.-Canada relations, a sign that the rules of trade between the two neighbors have fundamentally changed. The U.S. administration, which had already launched a series of tariffs against Canadian goods, particularly lumber, never expected such a dramatic and far-reaching response. To understand how this move unfolded, we have to go back a few years. In 2017, under the Trump administration, the U.S. imposed hefty tariffs on Canadian softwood lumber. The rationale? The U.S. government argued that Canadian lumber was being sold at unfairly low prices due to government subsidies. U.S. lumber producers claimed that these subsidies allowed Canada to flood the U.S. market with cheap lumber, driving down prices and hurting American businesses. The Canadian government, however, rejected these claims, insisting that the tariffs were unjustified and damaging to both economies. For years, this dispute simmered, with negotiations between the two countries failing to produce a resolution. The situation only escalated when Trump's administration increased tariffs, raising them to levels that made it harder for Canadian lumber to compete in the U.S. market. Canadian lumber producers, who had relied on the U.S. as their largest export market, suddenly found themselves facing barriers that threatened their livelihoods. But the retaliation from Canada came in a way that no one expected. Instead of a simple increase in tariffs on U.S. products or a call for more negotiations, Canada made an aggressive move by shutting down the entire lumber supply to the United States. The implications were immediate and far-reaching. For the U.S., this was a nightmare. Lumber is a crucial component of the U.S. economy, especially in the construction and housing sectors. As soon as the Canadian lumber stopped flowing across the border, prices for lumber in the U.S. skyrocketed. Builders, who had been accustomed to relatively affordable prices for raw materials, suddenly found themselves dealing with skyrocketing costs that made new construction projects unaffordable. Home buyers felt the effects almost immediately. The cost of building a new home rose substantially, and many prospective buyers were priced out of the market. The ripple effect was felt across the U.S. economy, as industries that rely on affordable lumber, such as furniture manufacturers, home improvement retailers, and even paper companies, also found their costs rising. The effects weren't just limited to the construction industry. The entire U.S. manufacturing sector that depended on Canadian lumber was suddenly facing a crisis. The U.S. government, particularly the Trump administration, was blindsided by this move. Initially, there was resistance to acknowledging the severity of the situation. After all, Canada had always been seen as a reliable trading partner, and the U.S. had imposed tariffs on many other nations before, but never with such immediate and far-reaching consequences. It wasn't just a matter of economics. It was a matter of political strategy, a clear signal from Canada that it was no longer going to sit idly by while the U.S. imposed tariffs on its most vital industries. For Canada, the decision to shut down the lumber supply was not one made lightly. Canadian officials knew that the move would have a significant impact on their own economy too. but they had calculated that the damage done by the US tariffs was greater than the impact of retaliating. By cutting off the lumber supply, Canada was sending a message to the US government. The relationship between the two countries was no longer one-sided, and if the US wanted to maintain access to Canadian goods, it would need to reassess its approach. Canada's move to shut down the lumber supply wasn't just about economics. It was a political maneuver that had far-reaching implications. By crippling the US construction industry, Canada was putting immense pressure on the Trump administration, hoping to force a resolution to the ongoing trade war. The message was clear. If the US continued to impose unfair tariffs, Canada would make it impossible for the US to rely on its resources. The Canadian government's strategy was built on a simple yet powerful principle: leverage. By using lumber as leverage, Canada was able to make a significant impact on the US economy, something that the US had failed to do in its attempts to hurt Canada's trade balance. The US was forced to reckon with the reality that Canada, with its vast forests and robust lumber industry, held the power to significantly disrupt the US economy when needed. As this trade dispute continued to unfold, it became clear that the relationship between the US and Canada was at a crossroads. For years, the two nations had enjoyed close economic ties, but the increasing tariffs, coupled with Canada's decisive response, signaled a shift in the dynamics of that relationship. The US government found itself caught between its desire to protect American industries and its reliance on Canadian exports. For Canadian producers, the situation wasn't without risk. While shutting down the lumber supply was a bold move, it was also a dangerous one. Canadian lumber producers stood to lose valuable business and, in the long term, may have faced a decrease in demand from other global markets. However, the Canadian government believed that the strategy would ultimately benefit their domestic market by forcing the US to reconsider its trade policies. The effects of Canada's decision were felt in ways that were not immediately apparent. Yes, the US construction sector was hit hard, but there were ripple effects throughout the US economy. Companies that relied on affordable lumber to manufacture their products found themselves in a tough spot. As lumber prices surged, the cost of building materials for homes, businesses, and even schools went up. The US government had to find a solution quickly, but the long-term consequences were already beginning to unfold. As Canadian producers continued to watch the fallout of their decision, they knew that the world was paying attention. The US was now dealing with the consequences of its trade policies, and the international community was witnessing the power of leverage in global trade. For Canada, this wasn't just a stand on behalf of its lumber industry. It was a stand for fair trade, an assertion that no country, no matter how large, should be allowed to dictate the terms of trade without consequences. For the Trump administration, the decision to engage in a trade war with Canada had backfired in a way that no one could have predicted. The collapse of the US lumber market wasn't just an economic setback, it was a political problem. With American home builders and manufacturers facing increasing costs, and US consumers paying higher prices for everything from new homes to furniture, the administration found itself under increasing pressure from both sides of the political spectrum. In the end, Canada's move to shut down the US lumber supply was a wake-up call to the US about the dangers of imposing tariffs without fully understanding the potential consequences. As the US tried to navigate the fallout from the crisis, it became clear that the US-Canada trade relationship would never be the same. Canada had taken a bold step to defend its economic interests, and it had successfully forced the US to reconsider its approach to international trade. For the US construction industry, for homeowners, and for many American workers, the fallout from this trade war is far from over. As lumber prices remain high and construction projects are delayed, the long-term consequences of this tariff dispute will continue to unfold. The US government, especially the Trump administration, will have to navigate a future in which trade wars no longer just hurt foreign competitors. They hurt American workers too. As lumber prices remain high, many Americans find themselves grappling with the consequences of this trade war. For the construction industry, the rise in costs isn't just a temporary hiccup. It's a long-term challenge that is slowing down projects and driving up prices for consumers. New housing developments are seeing significant delays as contractors struggle to secure the materials needed to complete projects on time. And for many homeowners, this means the dream of owning a new home is becoming less and less attainable. This isn't just a problem for builders and developers. It's a problem that affects every American who hopes to buy a home. As the cost of lumber and other building materials continues to skyrocket, New homes are being priced out of reach for millions of potential buyers. The affordability crisis in housing is one of the most pressing issues in the U.S. today, and the trade war with Canada has made it worse. The ripple effect is being felt across the entire housing market, from first-time homebuyers to middle-class families hoping to move into a bigger home. Construction companies are facing another hurdle: labor shortages. As lumber costs rise, so do the costs of labor. This has created a situation where construction firms are unable to keep up with demand, as many smaller companies simply can't afford to compete in an environment where prices are rapidly escalating. Major home builders are also struggling with rising material costs, and they are passing those costs on to consumers, further driving up home prices. For American workers, this trade dispute isn't just an issue for politicians to debate. It's a matter of survival. Thank you for watching Traveling Vibes. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. How do you think this lumber trade war will evolve? What should the U.S. do next to stabilize its industries? We'd love to hear your opinions. Stay tuned for more updates, and we'll see you in the next video.